Hello everyone, this is Cobalt. Today I'm going to be going through detailed explanations of all of the comeback mechanics available in Smash Ultimate, and as always there are timestamps in the description if you're looking for a particular character. Firstly, I want to define what a comeback mechanic is. A comeback mechanic is any mechanic in the game that rewards you for taking damage from your opponent or losing in an interaction. This includes added knockback, damage, heavier weight to your character, enhanced movement speed, etc. A good example of this is Lucario, whose attacks gain damage and knockback the more damage that Lucario receives. Now, by this definition, the only characters that would really fall under this category would be Lucario, Terry, and Kazuya. I'm expanding to include all the characters in this video, and I'll explain why they don't all fall under this exact definition in each of their respective sections. I'll be doing these in order of their fighter number, so let's get started. Wario is first up with his Waft. Waft is Wario's down special, which charges up over time throughout the match, and charges faster if Wario consumes something using his neutral special. Additionally, the charge time carries over between stocks, making it a reliable tool that you don't have to worry about maintaining or losing. The move has 4 stages of charging variation with different effects. Minimum charge, which deals no damage and trips opponents. Second stage, which occurs after 15 seconds of charge time, deals both 12% damage and corresponding knockback, scaling in power until reaches the third stage at 55 seconds. At this time, the third stage occurs, which deals 20% damage and corresponding knockback while scaling until the final stage. The final stage occurs at 110 seconds, or 1 minute 50 seconds. This stage deals 27% in knockback, and has super armor on the startup. After this final stage, Wario does not increase in knockback or damage output any further. Waft doesn't necessarily fall into the definition of a comeback mechanic since you get it based on the time that the match has gone on, and not on the status of the match itself. However, this is a mechanic that offers Wario a unique move that functions best in the later game, and offers Wario a reward that poses a sizable threat to the opponent and is comboed into rather easily in multiple scenarios. It's got a lot of utility on his kit and can seriously change the tide of the match, so I would consider it a comeback mechanic despite how it's obtained. Lucario is the first character with a true comeback mechanic. Well, at least by my definition. Lucario's Aura mechanic has been the staple of his kit since Brawl, and is damage and stock count based. The ability has 3 stages. It has a floor percentage at 65%, the baseline percentage functions variably based on the percentage in a linear fashion until it reaches the ceiling percentage at 190 based on the formula. Essentially, the more damage Lucario takes, the more damage and knockback his moves do. How the numerical calculation for this works is the Aura mechanic creates a factor R that is multiplied to the knockback and damage on all of Lucario's moves to adjust their output. There are 2 main formulas that influence the way his knockback works. There is the formula calculating the adjustment factor for damages from 0 to 65%, which as we see here means that at 0%, Lucario does 66% of his normal damage and knockback. This value is gradually increased up to 100% at 65 damage before transitioning into another formula shown here, from 65% damage up to 190% damage, at which point the multiplier is capped. Based on this new formula, we can see that as Lucario's damage increases, so does the R factor of his Aura. This R factor caps out at 167%, indicating that Lucario does a maximum of 67% more than his base damage and knockback. At its core, all Aura does is create a factor that is then multiplied by the knockback and damage to adjust the final value, and whose impacting variable is the damage that Lucario has. I consider this a true comeback mechanic since it only benefits Lucario when he's taking damage. Now, this could be used in an advantage situation since you could 3-stock your opponent at 190%, and it wouldn't be much of a comeback there, but basic premise for how Lucario obtains it is still a loss in neutral. Little Mac's K.O. punch is up next. I know that most people consider this a comeback mechanic. Just like Lucario and Terry, Little Mac is rewarded for taking damage, so it must be a comeback mechanic, right? Well, it's true it is a comeback mechanic, however Little Mac also fills his meter by dealing damage, so Little Mac could theoretically not take any damage and still get KO punch. It's still a comeback mechanic, I just want to make that distinction. It's comparable to Sephiroth's One-Winged Angel, which we'll get to in a moment. As Little Mac deals or receives damage, he fills portions of his power meter until the value reaches its cap at 100 units. There are 10 arrows on the power meter, indicating 10 unit intervals. When Little Mac receives damage, the percent done to Mac is how many units are filled. So if you get hit with an attack that does 20%, 20 units of Mac's power meter will be filled. When dealing damage, however, Mac receives units on his power meter equivalent to the damage done multiplied by 0.3. So if Mac deals 10% damage to the opponent, 3 units of the power meter will be filled until it reaches 100 units. Obviously for Mac to obtain KO punch solely by dealing damage, he would have to deal a significantly higher amount of damage than by receiving it, but it can still be done. KO punch is usually received in some combination of receiving and dealing damage, and is not limited to a single use in a given stock should he survive long enough. KO Punch lasts until Little Mac uses it or if he's sent into a tumble state out of an attack. However, for the first 4 seconds after obtaining it, Little Mac cannot lose it. KO Punch deals 35%, is unblockable, it ignores all armor, and it cannot be countered with the sole exception being Bayonetta's Witch Time. It also has super armor itself on frames 8 and 9. If performed in the air, it loses all of these properties and deals only 13% damage, though it does offer him some slight vertical and horizontal momentum which can be useful for recovering. On to Cloud. Cloud's unique fighter mechanic is Limit Break. This mechanic isn't a comeback mechanic in the traditional sense for 2 reasons. Firstly, Cloud is capable of charging it up on his own while completely disengaging with the opponent, which was a useful camping strategy in Smash 4. He also charges his limit by dealing or receiving damage, so in a similar fashion to Little Mac as I mentioned previously, Cloud can obtain his limit while being an advantage and not necessarily only when he's losing. This mechanic actually functions identically to Little Mac's power meter, in that it is a meter with 100 units to be filled. It gains 1 unit for every % damage done to Cloud, and fills 0.75 units for every % damage that Cloud deals to the opponent in Ultimate. As I said earlier, it can be charged by using his down special, which charges to completion over the course of 400 frames, or just under 7 seconds. When Cloud has limit, his gravity, fall speed, initial dash distance, and run speed are increased by 10%. His walk speed and traction are increased by 15%, and his airspeed and aerial acceleration are increased by 20%, which in tandem greatly increases his movement speed overall, making his run nearly as fast as Fox and overall improving his mobility. It also converts all of his special moves into a one-time use, more powerful version, and also improves his recovery. Once he has limit, it can only be held for 15 seconds before it disappears. In Ultimate, if Cloud is hit or grabbed while charging, he loses points on his limit gauge. This move has seen some changes since Smash 4, which have toned it down quite a bit, but it's still a pretty good mechanic. Granting Cloud a significantly buffed multi-hit projectile, an instant multi-hit side special with almost no lag, a heavily buffed recovery option with an up special that's also a reasonable KO option out of shield, and a buffed down special that deals virtually no damage but kills really early. Cloud is able to pretty effectively apply pressure by charging his limit and force an approach option from the opponent. Now for our first DLC character, Joker. Joker's comeback mechanic is his Rebellion gauge, which summons Arsene when it's full. His gauge operates comparably to Little Mac's power meter or Cloud's limit gauge. It's broken down into 100 units and is filled in a variety of ways. If Joker takes damage, his Rebellion gauge is filled by 1.3 units for every % damage he takes. So if he's hit with a move that deals 10%, he will add 13 units to his Rebellion gauge, needing 87 to fill it completely. He needs to take roughly 77% damage to get Arsene if he is only receiving damage. Additionally, his Rebellion gauge charges by itself at 0.00925 units per frame, or 1.1 units every 2 seconds. This means that Joker can get Arsene after 3 minutes without doing anything. Lastly, he can charge his gauge by using his down special, Rebel's Guard. If Joker uses Rebel's Guard, he will fill his gauge using a slightly different formula. It's the percentage damage taken, multiplied by 1.3, multiplied by 0.4, multiplied by 6.7368, which will instantly fill his gauge if he's hit by 28.6% damage or more. These activation circumstances are why I don't consider this a comeback mechanic in the same way I do for Lucario or Terry, since Joker can get it without doing anything and the way that it functions. Once Joker's Rebellion's Guard reaches 100 units, he will activate Arsene, and he remains active until Rebellion gauge reaches 0 again. This equates to 30 seconds, or 1800 frames if Joker receives no damage. Arsene functions based on the frames of being active as opposed to units in his Rebellion gauge. Should he take damage while Arsene is active, the amount of frames that Arsene is active is reduced by 16 multiplied by the damage received. So if Joker takes 10% damage, Arsene will be reduced by 160 frames of activation, which is approximately 2.6 seconds of time. His down special grants him super armor, being complete knockback resistance, and reduces the damage he takes by 40%. If Joker loses his stock, the meter gets reset to 20 units to begin charging again on a fresh stock. During the time Arsene is active, Joker's attacks gain additional hitboxes that deal extra damage and knockback. They can connect simultaneously with Joker's original hitboxes, which adjust knockback angles and increases the applied damage. Many people have experienced this, I'm sure, and his attacks are much more brutal and they hit a lot harder. And overlapping hitboxes create some really good angles and knockback for Joker to use. Terry is next, another true comeback mechanic wielding character in his Go ability. This ability offers him 2 additional high damage, high knockback moves after he reaches 100% for him to use as frequently as the player wishes. These moves are Buster Wolf, a sliding pseudo command grab that has limited armor and insane KO potential, and Power Geyser, a large high-reaching blast of fire emanating from the ground with huge range and incredible shield breaking potential. This is probably the least complicated of all the comeback mechanics in the game, 100%. Terry gets 2 new moves that last until his stock goes away. Simple. One unique thing about this though is that Terry can cancel the N-lag of his normals into these moves just like he can with his normal specials. So for instance, up tilt confirms into Power Geyser because it cancels the N-lag when Power Geyser is used. Same for forward tilt into Buster Wolf. These moves cannot be performed in the air however, so let's start with Buster Wolf. Buster Wolf is an input command where Terry slides forward with an outstretched fist. During the startup of the move, it has damage-based armor that resists up to 8%. Upon making contact with the opponent, it converts into a command grab with a finishing hit, though it should be noted that this move doesn't grab shielding opponents. It's honestly one of my favorite moves in the game. It looks so badass. Now for Power Geyser. Power Geyser is also a command input in the same way Buster Wolf is. On the startup of the move, Terry has damage-based armor that's capable of withstanding up to 5% damage, and it has a far-reaching diagonal hitbox that's insanely powerful. It's a really strong move, covers a lot of range, and as mentioned earlier, it confirms out of up tilt, which can confirm at virtually any percent. It's one of Terry's strongest KO options. Terry's additional moves that he gains from Go make for terrifying options that can completely change the tide of the battle, and since they can confirm out of his normals, they are a force to be reckoned with for sure. Steve is next. Now, this isn't necessarily a comeback mechanic per se, but Steve's mine ability definitely does have some useful properties the longer the game goes on, which grants him advantages, so I wanted to include it on this list in order to explain how it works and to ensure I wasn't missing anything. Steve has the ability to mine the stage for materials. The reason I have elected to include this is because it offers Steve the option for increasing his damage output as well as adjusting his frame data for certain instances. This encourages Steve not to engage with the opponent, which is why I think that it's a poor mechanic. Same thing with Cloud and Smash 4 with limit camping. No, bad Cobalt. Steve has several options for his weaponry. He has no weapon where his damage deals 80% of its normal damage output. The base weapons are made out of wood, which deal 100% of the base damage. If he upgrades his weapons one stage, then they are stone, which does 110% the base damage. Next is iron, which does 120% of base damage, followed by gold, which does 100% of base damage. This is the same damage output as wood, but I'll discuss why in a moment. Finally, we have diamond, which deals a whopping 135% of the base damage on Steve's attacks that use them. So down tilt and down smash are not impacted by this, for instance. With diamond weapons, Steve has an increase in damage comparable to Lucario with Aura and Rage at 130%, which is insane. It doesn't change the knockback the same way that Aura does, as it's only impacting the damage output, but it's worth mentioning a comparable increase. But now I want to discuss the frame data. When Steve has no weapon, or whenever he's using wood, stone, iron, or diamond weapons, all of his frame data is identical between them. When Steve is using gold weapons, however, he's granted with better startup and a lower FAF on some of his moves, namely his forward tilt, up tilt, forward smash, and forward and back aerials, though on his aerials this only applies with the short hop macros. So if you're using a gold weapon, the speed and combo game of his attacks are improved. One interesting thing is that Steve has different frame data based on how his aerials are performed. His back air has 12 frames of startup if performed in midair, but only has 4 frames of startup if performed rising and using the short hop macro, 3 frames of startup on gold weapons. His weapons also have a durability mechanic. Each weapon has a different amount of durability, and each attack diminishes the durability by varying amounts, which certainly can impact how he's played. I'd probably consider this more of a resource management ability compared to Robin as opposed to an actual comeback mechanic, but I think that mine offers Steve the most benefit of any character that has resource management because he forces the opponent to approach and is capable of effectively keeping them out. And if he does this successfully, he can get a pretty large power boost to his kit that very much can alter the outcome of a game. Lastly, there's Redstone. Redstone increases the speed and power of Minecart as well as the damage output of TNT and allowing it to have a pressure switch on it. Steve starts out with a certain amount of these materials in his inventory and can have up to 100 of dirt, wood, stone, and iron, and a maximum of 12 gold, 5 diamond, and 15 redstone, so it's definitely advantageous to be able to prevent him from mining if you can. Now for Sephiroth and his one-winged angel ability. After a certain amount of percent is dealt or received, Sephiroth will gain a wing which affords him the third jump, heavy armor on all of his smash attacks that each take up to 20%. It's not super armor, just so everybody knows. Super armor is complete knockback resistance, and Kazuya doesn't have super armor either, but we'll get to that. And it offers him a slew of stat buffs from damage output to fall speed. The alterations that this ability gives Sephiroth is pretty insane. And while it doesn't increase the base knockback or knockback scaling of any of his moves, the knockback formula does take into account the opponent's percent after the hit and the damage done from the hit, so this damage increase does directly increase knockback for all of his attacks. The way that this actually functions is a little different from some of the other comeback mechanics I've discussed already. So Sephiroth's wing form activates at different ranges based on how the match is going. It isn't based on how much damage he deals, but it activates after taking a certain amount of damage, which varies dynamically based on the stock count. If Sephiroth is down 1 stock to 3 stocks, it will activate around 40%. If the stocks are even, it will activate around 65%. And if Sephiroth is up 3 stocks to 1 stock, it will activate around 90%. Sephiroth instantly loses his winged form if he loses a stock, but he's also able to lose it after activating it if certain criteria is met. Upon activation, Sephiroth is granted a certain number of points, which are dependent on the stock count. If Sephiroth is ahead by 2 stocks, he's given 50 points. If he's ahead by 1 stock, he's given 65 points. On even stocks, 90 points. On 1 stock behind, 100 points. And on 2 stocks behind, he's given 110 points. He then loses these points based on how the rest of the match goes. If he takes a stock, he loses 50 points, not including self-destructs. He loses points equivalent to 30% of the damage he inflicts on his opponent. So if he did 10% damage to his opponent, the point counter would go down by 3 points, which ignores move scaling or modifiers and is calculated based on the base damage Sephiroth's attacks do. If he loses more points than he has in the tank, his winged form will deactivate. It's a really good ability to have and offers him a lot of really good attributes and is one of the better comeback mechanics in my opinion on this list. However, I'm not gonna lie, it's one of the most complicated in terms of its activation and deactivation criteria. Lastly is Kazuya. Once Kazuya reaches 100%, all of his moves gain a 1.1 multiplier to his move's percent damage output and does not appear to alter the move's knockback. This multiplier does not have a time limit and lasts until Kazuya uses the special moves given to him in this state. This state lasts until Kazuya uses Rage Drive or it expires by accumulated damage. This mode can only be accessed once per stock. If Kazuya misses his Rage Drives, this also reduces the amount of time that this state lasts. This chart displays the amount of damage needed to eliminate the Rage state based on how many Rage Drives he has missed. If Kazuya is fresh and hasn't missed any Rage Drives, it takes about 37% for him to be knocked out of his Rage mode. The more Rage Drives he misses, the less damage he's able to take and still maintain this state, with 1 missed Rage Drive being deactivated around 31%, 2 missed at 24%, and so on, culminating in the mode being eliminated after 6 Rage Drives with 0 damage taken. The Rage Drive move itself functions as a command grab with a very high amount of knockback and dealing around 15% of damage depending on how it's input. Rage Drive can be activated by one of 3 methods. It can be activated by landing a successful grab, a down special, or by inputting right, down, diagonal down right and hitting the attack button. The input version of the move results in a more powerful version of the move that deals more knockback, while the grab and down special iterations are the same. Rage Drive has super armor on it as well, and the input version of the move can be performed out of crouch dash, which makes it an excellent KO option with a relatively safe approach thanks to crouch dash's intangibility. It's also worth noting that you can still do normal throws whenever Rage is active by buffering the input as opposed to doing Rage Drive, which will not deplete his Rage meter. That about wraps it up, I think. I hope that everyone has found this informative and useful, and if you have additional questions or I've gotten something wrong, please let me know down in the comments below. Once again, I'm Cobalt, and thanks for watching.